I try not to be too stressed out about the stress that I have or like too neurotic about the neurosis I have. You know what I mean? I try not to double down on my crazy. I feel like this is something that yoga really helps with how my brain works. Is it has its own chaos, but I've learned not to double down on it. And I've kind of learned to manage and ride it a little bit more.
Hi, I'm Derek Mills. Welcome to the Glow Podcast. This week on the podcast, I am honored to present two Glow teachers in conversation, Kia Miller and Jason Crandell. Jason opens up their conversation with his thoughts about how being a person with ADHD has influenced and improved his work as a yoga teacher. He speaks to the ways he sees the physical yoga postures as tools to access deep states of being. Together, he and Kia explore the ways they continue to develop as practitioners and teachers. And toward the end of the conversation, they pay homage to a few of their mentors like Carpenter and Elena. I'd like to also point out a programming note. Kia has recorded an interview with Elena that we're excited to present to you on the podcast. And Annie Carpenter, who has been both a guest and a guest host on the podcast, will be back soon with new episodes. I hope you enjoy this special conversation between Kia Miller and Jason Crandell. Here's Kia to kick it off.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Glow Podcast. I'm really honored to be a guest host. I was invited to do a few sessions by Derek. One of the first names that came to mind was Jason. And Jason, you might find this strange because you and I don't know each other so well. We've met, I think, a couple of times at Yoga Journal conferences or similar. But your name precedes you. You must know that, I guess. Your name precedes you. And you have so many students who are excited to share what they've learned from you and how much they love you. So you sprung to mind straight away when I thought of doing this.
I appreciate that, Kia. And I've done this for a long time, as have you, so we're fortunate enough to do something we love and have a pretty long track record. And so, yeah.
Well, welcome. I mean, here's just a few things that your students say about you to me. Approachable, generous, humble, relatable, transparent on your own path and evolution, and committed to the process of always learning. I guess that goes with the previous one. But that's how you're coming across anyway to people who are practicing with you, regularly.
Honestly, I will take and agree with all those things. I grew up in the Midwest, and I have a little bit of a shyness around, or like my instinct is to deflect any positive comment said my way. But I will take all of those because those are all true. Like those really are true. Yeah, I feel really fortunate to be able to be those things and have people. I feel seen in that way. Do you know what I mean? Like I feel like those things are the ways that I see myself as well.
That's incredible. I mean, to me, that's an example of a life of lived yoga with, self-reflection, self-correction, and deep understanding of who we are on the integral level. And I've heard you speak so openly about how you deal with ADHD or how you deal with, keeping your nervous system regulated so that you can be a strong channel for others. And I'd love for you just to mention that or speak to that to begin with, because I think it's something that so many people struggle with, not something we're taught very often how to self-regulate.
Yeah, I think, when I reflect on what drew me to yoga in the first place was that it was a reflective environment. And I needed a reflective environment. I feel like I've always had on the outside when I grew up like white, middle class, Midwestern guy, like no real external stresses or pressures, right? Just being like in the normative culture and all these things. At the same time, my inner life always felt emotionally unsettled, just to some degree, like high emotions, high unsettled. And I don't think that, I don't want to attribute everything to ADHD, but I certainly didn't know what that was as a kid. But I needed an environment where I could kind of try to understand the chaos that was happening inside, because because it was there, right? It was there whether I wanted it or not, which FYI, I didn't want it. I still don't really want it, but it's there. And so when I came across yoga, it just felt like a place that was very allowing of what we would call neurodiversity, right? But it's very allowing for a range of emotional landscapes. And I feel like it was the first environment where the first solution wasn't try not to feel that way, but it was, let's sit with this, right? And I remember taking a class early on and a teacher saying something along the lines of, whatever you experience is normal. It's okay. You don't need to change it, but see if you can practice not being overly affected by it. And I was like, whoa, that just so completely spoke to me. And I think it's for these reasons that I've really pursued it. And I love the physicality of it. Like I've always liked physical things, and I love I've even gotten to the point where I admit, like, I enjoy the aesthetic of it. I enjoy like a lot of the dimensions of the practice, but I think it's that it is, or at least my experience of it, is an environment that really lends itself to looking at and observing what's happening inside. And that process is kind of something like I think about a lot. Is I try not to be too stressed out about the stress that I have, or like too neurotic about the neurosis I have. You know what I mean? I try not to double down on my crazy. And I feel like this is something that yoga really helps with how my brain works. Is it has its own chaos, but I've learned not to double down on it. And I've kind of learned to manage and ride it a little bit more. So I think, kind of summing this up, I feel like my practice helps me, this is a big term, but self-regulate. But that doesn't mean I think I'm self-regulated. I'm not. Like, I'm as regulated as I get. So it helps me self-regulate, but it helps me not double down. So it keeps me at like you know what I mean? Like, it keeps me at a very manageable baseline. So the only other thing real quick is that I think because most people don't really understand ADHD, and there's kind of a backlash to it in some ways. It's like, it's really an executive functioning disorder. And it's also a scenario where it has the opposite, which it has hyperfocus. And so that's also what helps me be good at like the thing or two I'm good at. If I find a lane, boy, oh boy, I can teach a class longer than anyone can stay in that class. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, oh, I have a 10-hour class. Let's do it. But if I have to focus on anything else, I'm like, I bounce off the walls. So like the way my brain works, it presents challenges in day-to-day life, but it's a really good brain for me to have when I'm teaching yoga, because I can lock in and stay ultra focused.
Wow. I just love that. Absolutely. I think that probably anybody who's taken your class can attest to your laser focus and your attention to detail as you're teaching, and really using the pose and the physicality as an access point into the subtle, into a deeper experience. I've heard you speak, that about the idea of using the asana, but it's not really about the muscles or the skeleton. It's about this deeper experience that one accesses, the realm of consciousness, you could say, or the realm of simply feeling embodied and calm and present. So I really get that, and I appreciate what you just shared. And I want to speak more to the physical practices and processes, but because you mentioned it, I really am interested, because where I see people right now on the mental level flipping out is that it's like, they call it in the Yoga Sutras, the Vritti Samskara chakra, the wheel, the churning of the wheel in the groove, whatever groove the mind is set in. So a resentment thought, perhaps, or a worry that creeps in, or an insecurity or a doubt, and the mind's just whirring on it and unable to let it go. And I've seen people really will corner themselves in that process where it feels so hard to get out. So I'm curious, because you say you can, and I hope you don't mind me going so personal here, but you can stop yourself from doubling down, or my husband Tommy calls it, you don't shoot the second arrow to yourself. So what is the process you use? Clearly it's connected to your awareness, your ability to see what's happening. Like number one, I guess, witnessing. So
I'm pretty good at fixating on things, right? Like I'm pretty good at getting like kind of stuck in a rut, or getting into like a kind of like a hyper focus. And hyper focus can work well for me, as I just talked about in teaching. But it can also be a place where I get stuck in a groove that I don't really want to be in, and I understand it's not productive. So I can for sure get stuck. I'm not so much of a reminiscer. I don't get too stuck on the past, right? I'm like, it's over. I have almost, I don't want to say I have no relationship to the past, but my mind usually doesn't ruminate on something that has happened, or my interpretation of what happened. It gets stuck in ruminations about futurizing, right? And I feel like where my practice has helped me is I at very least know that it's happening when it's happening. And so I have that like metacognition that the brain part of me is firing, and it's like stuck in a lane. And it's probably just going to do that for a while. And I can kind of like watch it and be like, okay, this is me doing what I do. And so I don't want to say that I don't get stuck and cascade in the same way, but because I usually have an awareness of it as it's happening, I can take greater ownership of it. And sometimes, and also like, it's a place where it doesn't sabotage my relationships. I don't know if it ever did, but it certainly doesn't anymore, because I will tell my wife or my kid, I probably even tell my dog, but I'm like, hey, I'm really stressed out today. There's like literally my mind is just fixated on this thing. Don't take my mood personally. There's nothing going on. I'm just stuck in blah, blah, blah mode. And you know what I mean? So it's kind of like, not only do I see it, but I also am decent at communicating, hey, this is my mind is doing its thing again. It's not going to happen forever. So be patient with me, please.
Oh my God. I just love that. I love that. It's so good to have that kind of, relational intimacy too, where you can feel safe to just say to somebody, look, I'm going through this right now. And don't take me personally. I love that. I spent the last 2 years going into month-long meditation sadhanas. And the first one that I did, the lesson that I got so clearly when I went into what I call churning, something happens, ego gets triggered, I grip onto something, I'm trying to figure my way, into fixing it from an egoic, usually self-righteous perspective or egoic hurt perspective. And I got to see so clearly that everything I thought was about somebody else was actually about me. And when I could to detach on that level, I could start to dig in to see what was going on a deeper level, to realize, okay, I just have to let go of that, because thinking that, if I just tell so-and-so, they'll know, one of those. If I could just let go of that, I can have my peace back. I can have my peace of mind back again. It's none of my business. And then if it got to a deeper one that I went through, I got to realize that I was projecting something onto somebody else that was to do with an old familial situation. And I could start to self-reflect around that. And I'm thankful for the tools of yoga that got me there to understand, that process of how to do that and how not to project it out and make a lot of drama in the field, because I feel like that's often what happens when we get stuck in a mental pattern and we externalize it and we make it about somebody else. We create a whole disturbance that actually doesn't need to be there if we take full radical responsibility. Now, I have to just categorize this for a moment, because I feel like what you're speaking about is on a more is not necessarily on this level of deep self-work. I feel your self-reflection, self-correction, but more on, how to deal with something that's penetrating in that really maybe you just need to detach from. Is that right?
Yes. I feel like, I don't know, I have to be honest. I feel like most of my concerns and most of my worries and most of my neuroses and futurizations, all these things, they're pretty trivial. I mean, they're pretty banal. Like when I really reflect on them, it's almost like, I don't know why I'm just like, I get so kind of wound up about X, Y, or Z, because the fortunate reality is all of my needs, all of my real primary needs are well taken care of. And so when I'm struggling with something mentally or emotionally, it's not that it's not real. I don't know that I come off as such, but I'm a super uber sensitive person. I kind of play that down a little bit, because I'm also like a Midwestern male. So I have like uber sensitive meets Midwestern male, and they never know what to do within me. You know what I mean? But the reality is, when I get as objective as I can be about the majority of what throws me off or I struggle with, I can say they're pretty trivial. They're in life. And again, that doesn't mean that I haven't dealt with some like real difficult human stuff. But at least in the phase of life I'm in, if I have worries or complaints, they're pretty banal.
Yeah, I really get that, Jason. I really get that. Yeah. And yet one could easily still trip up on them if we weren't being, aware and vigilant, and if we weren't in practice. And I guess for me, my interest in life is yoga as a practice, yoga as a process of transformation, and yoga as a state, right? As a state of being where we feel whole, we feel integrated, and using the practice, obviously, to ignite and catalyze the reflective process, the embody process, and then, which maybe we would call tapas, right, in the yoga tradition, and then the svadhyaya, or the self-study, or the way to move through life with the awareness that we're gaining on the mat. Like, it seems to me that is perhaps the most important piece. Obviously, we can't have that without the first, without the body, without grounding, without moving, without feeling like our bodies are safe place or without feeling inspired to be in the body and learning new things. And yet then there's the practice of bringing what we're learning, the realizations we're having, into the lived experience of life. And I guess to me, that's always my interest point. How are we bringing what we know into our everyday interaction? So I'm curious, what your teachings are on that as you, as you're educating a lot of people through teacher training processes, obviously in your regular classes as well.
You've already touched on it. You talked about in your meditation practices coming to a realization that most of the most of the challenges or most of the kind of the maybe conflict or struggle that you had came down to you, right? And I think this is what I try to help people do from just an interpersonal perspective, is see themselves in a situation, and that works in a healthy relationship, right? But I don't make any advice about what to do in a not healthy relationship, because I don't know. Like that's really far out of my professional scope. But when it comes to like daily functional healthy relationships on our response to relationships in the world around us, I really think that we can really own what we do. I mean, I can barely, like, one of the things I learned as a parent is like, I can't quote unquote make my kid do anything. Like, I can make them do something because I can withhold or I can punish or I can incentivize or whatever. But those don't really, in my experience, work. They don't really work. And they have unforeseen outcomes and consequences down the road, right? So maybe as a parent, I get what I want, but man, at some point, me getting what I want is going to come back and bite me. That I can pretty much guarantee that. So I just feel as students, or not as students, but as a teacher, I try to convey the message of, we really have to take responsibility and accountability for our own, not only our own actions and behaviors. That's, I think, kind of a little bit more obvious. That's just being more mature. But we have to take responsibility for our own emotional landscape and health. I think this, even for me personally, honestly, bleeds into talking about, quote unquote, the yoga community. I never talk about the yoga community. Never. That's a crazy thing to do. First of all, it's not a community. It's countless communities that are heterogeneous and crazy diverse and include people that believe everything about something and the opposite of that thing. So the last thing I'm going to do is talk about the community and what it should or shouldn't do. So what I always try to do is have people just take ownership of their role in the yoga community and do what they do in an honest and authentic way. Don't try to take on the community or the world. Just do. And it's not that I'm saying people shouldn't interact with the broader community, but in terms of being a teacher and a student, I really think these practices are profoundly self-focused, and not in an egotistical way, but in a way where we really have to, I think the vast majority of us really have to spend the majority of our time sorting ourselves out and then just move from there. Because I know if I'm trying to sort someone else out or the community out, man, deep down, I know I'm not even sorted on the issue. I know I'm not even sorted on this. So I think I think that.
I really love that, and I hear you, and I really agree. Actually, it's perhaps the first level, I think, of radical self-responsibility to be able to pull back. And one of the great teachings I heard on the Bhagavad Gita, when I asked a teacher, what his definition of better to do your own dharma incorrectly or not beautifully than somebody else's perfectly. And I asked him that, and he just turned to me and he said to me, "Mind your own business." And I remember going, "Oh," and then he carried on after a beat, completely, totally. Mind your own business. And then I got it. I was like, oh, I get it. It was, he really means mind your own business. Don't get in somebody else's business. And that seems to be so up in the popular culture right now, because we as human beings, when we get uncomfortable about something or when we are fearful about something, or if we just feel triggered, we tend to start to want to mind other people's business without having fully investigated ourselves, and borrowing, therefore, a lot of other people's opinions before we truly self-reflect and decide where we stand on something. And so I agree, and I feel like, at least for me, that's just so necessary, and why I tend to stay quiet on a lot of issues that people dive into in the public sphere and in the yoga community, because I'm always looking to see where am I hooked into this for my own reasons, and what do I need to learn about something before I'm even educated to have an opinion about it. So yeah, I think that's it's right on the mark. When you're teaching, it seems to me that you really use the physical posture as an avenue, as a doorway in. One quote that I wrote down that I heard you say was, importance is not the pose is the doorway in. And when you say the doorway in, what are you referencing in that moment? Obviously, it could depend on the context and, the greater teaching of the class, as an example.
So this might be like one of the greatest misreadings of all time. But I was an Iyengar student for a long time, and I never thought the technique was about the body. I never did. I always thought it was about the focus, right? And again, yeah, it is about the body. It is, but not really. It's about the focus, because if you understood I never studied directly with BKS Iyengar, and because I'm a contrarian, I always had one foot out the door anyways. But I had one foot in the door in the Iyengar Institute for a long time. And I read Iyengar's books and like his like notes on class and all these things. And I always felt like, yeah, there's a lot of technique, and the technique is really interesting. And I found that even just the technique intellectually interesting, physically and intellectually interesting. But when I understood the broader context of his teaching, I still always felt like, he has this quote, something along the lines of how can we know God if we don't understand our pinky toe? And I kind of understood that of like, oh, if we don't have the ability to really focus on the gross, how are we going to focus on the subtle? If we can't kind of lock our mind into something that's tangible, then how are we going to focus on something that is metaphysical in a way that's real, that's not just like the mind doing mind stuff, like vritti stuff, right? And so I just always saw those practices. I saw technique in that world as running like in parallel lines. It ran in an obvious physical line, And to me, that's good. Like we are actually also physical. And Hatha yoga is actually physical. People tell me all the time, I'll get this call like, well, yoga's not just about asana. It's like, totally. I got that note a while ago. But also Hatha yoga is actually physical. Right. It is. It is actually a sensory experience.
Yes.
And I think the sensory experience is probably more important than the intellectual experience. But anyways, but so I just always saw the Iyengar technique as postural, and it's a mechanism to focus, right? And that worked so well for me because not only are my emotions sensitive, but my body's sensitive. Like I have a lot of proprioceptive feedback. It's actually one of the nice things for me about not being a super flexible body. I don't have to go very far in any direction to get feedback. And so, right. And I tell my students all the time, I'm really good at poses where I don't have to bend anything. Like handstand, forearm balance, I can crush it. Shavasana, Tadasana, I'm amazing. But once I have to start to bend at the waist or move my spine, it gets tricky. But like all of those, so you have the physicality, that technique, because I have good sensory feedback and good proprioception, it's way easier for me to stay focused on something physical than it is something intellectual, right? And I have a philosophy degree. Like I can deal with intellectual abstractions, but I almost never like them anymore. Like I kind of want something to be tangible. Like I just, and so the physicality of the yoga practice and the technique I like the body, I like physicality. And also that's the stuff that really tunes my attention really well. And so that they just work really hand in hand. I don't really see any distinction for me between a physical experience and like an intellectual experience or a focused state. They all kind of play together for me.
Wow. I just love that. You said a lot there. And I love which I'd never heard it spoken in the terms of the physicality and the alignment cues are just a way of focus. And yes, they are, but just to hear you say that is illuminating. It really, it's so powerful. And also, you know, when I've heard you speak and that, you know, just as I was looking at everything that you're doing before, you know, having this talk with you, I could sense the power of your intellect. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean it in a really positive way. Wow. You know, you really grasp things, and are able to put it all together in a coherent whole, probably why you love philosophy studies. And yet to hear you speak of the power of the physical experience and that it's the felt experience, you know, where the wisdom, well, from my interpretation of that is it's the felt experience where the real wisdom rises, where the connection to whatever we want to call it, higher power or just reality as a whole. We have that connection through the physical practice. So thank you for sharing that. I think it's such good inspiration for people to understand that. I personally come from dissociating. That was my way of dealing with traumatic experience in my childhood. So I had to do Ashtanga for like 12 years. And also coming from a stiff body, knowing I was never going to go beyond the primary series and just showing up every day just to try to touch my toes in the beginning and just to feel my body. I had no idea how to stretch even. It was a very powerful process of, yes, the reason why we're embodied beings, we're not just mental beings. We're not floating around. There's a reason that we have a body. Yeah. And to ground in it and feel at home in it. And then how the wisdom of the body, therefore, starts to inform the way we think and feel. And our choices can change just on that. That's at least what I found going through this process. And another quote I'd read of yours, which really is that body and posture is the environment where you experience yoga. And when you say experience yoga there, what is your sense of that?
Oh man, this is where description, I think, starts getting hard, right? And it's where I have to go very my experience of it, right? Because when it's this, right, it's this. So kind of what I meant by that quote, right? I remember writing that, and it's kind of thinking about, like, I was almost thinking about the asana practice as like the house, right? That it's not the experience that one is having, it's the environment in which someone is having the experience, right? And I'm sure so many people have said this. So many people I'm sure have said this, but I remember being on a panel with Gary Krafsow, and he said this quote. He said, asana is not an end goal in and of itself. That articulates something really nicely. And it's fine. Those of you that are listening, like, it's fine to have like asana goals too, right? Totally fine. But like in the yoga tradition, it's not the end. Same thing, like the house isn't the end. It's the environment in which you have an experience. So a pose to me is a tool. Breath is a tool. All the techniques are tools. They're tools or their environments. But the experience for me of yoga is actually just the experience of having my being present. Like when I'm not futurizing, I'm not thinking about something else. I'm in that more of a flow state where I'm registering what's happening in my body, but my mind is nowhere else. Like I'm completely absorbed in the moment. Not even so much so to say like, and the whole universe is one. Like if I reflect on that, sure, but that's not my experience in the moment, because more of what I feel in certain moments is the momentary cessation of fluctuations, right? Where there's just kind of this feeling of pure feeling. There's not a narrative. There's not a story. There's not this or that. There's just a feeling of being completely immersed in what I'm doing. And there's times where, there's other environments, right? For me, often it's an asana practice or a meditation practice or a pranayama practice. But for others, it's other states of being, it's other practices, it's other techniques. But yeah, I think that's what I mean by that is the pose. I might be doing a really nice pose or a really lousy pose, but if I'm thinking about what email I have to finish, what Glow class I have to film, what I have to edit, blah, 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 that's fine. That's a normal state, but that doesn't feel like a yoga state. I might be doing yoga, but I'm not not every time I do yoga do I experience yoga, right? I mean, that's the reality. A lot of times it's like just like management and movement, and it feels good. But I think what I was trying to articulate in that space is the experience of yoga for me is that state of contentment and absorption in what I'm doing.
For so many of us, perhaps just the pleasure of going through a yoga practice can be enough. Just showing up can be enough. Just getting to Shavasana can feel enough. And the space that opens up there. And And I think for me, especially in my early days of practice, the joy was simply being able to move my body and learn new things and explore. Yeah. And I've spoken to students who have really benefited so much from your teachings when it comes to that. Learning what to look for in a pose so that they can find that. And so yeah, just I guess a reflection of some of how you're teaching.
Yeah. This memory is coming up where the first time I was exposed to the Bhagavad Gita was actually a somewhat critical analysis, because it was in a social justice course about Gandhi and civil disobedience. So it was about like Gandhi, civil disobedience, social justice. And as part of it, we looked at the Bhagavad Gita. It was not the primary text, but it was there. Those things are somewhat beyond the point. But what I wanted to bring up is what I recall in Gandhi's autobiography was named, I think the name was Glimpses of the Truth. And right. And so that always stuck with me, this idea that you glimpse it, right? It's just like because he was talking about truth as a matter of social justice, but he was also talking about seeing, whether he was talking about experiencing Purusha or whatever it was, he was talking about glimpsing the true total reality. And he was very honest that it was just a glimpse here and there, like once in a while. And it's kind of what I feel when I do my yoga practice. Like my yoga practice is always nice, always feel good. I always enjoy it. I'm always happy I'm doing it. But it's only on occasion that I feel like I get that deeper glimpse of a unitive state of yoga, maybe along the lines of what has been described over the centuries.
Oh, I just love that. Absolutely. I love that. It reminds me of a reggae song. Just one glimpse is all it took, of Haile Selassie. I think that was the line. I can't remember who the reggae artist was, but that's that idea. And at least for me, when I had that first glimpse in a yoga class, I practice Kundalini yoga, teach Kundalini yoga as well. I'm also, as you've referenced, I keep my feet. I have two of them. I keep my feet in many worlds. I'm not just in one lane. But my first experience of that glimpse was after I did a strong navel kriya in a Kundalini class, and my mind just went quiet, and I'd never had that, and I remember having the sense of oh, there I am. It was like a weird self-reflective moment, and then sort of an awareness that grew out of it when I reflected on it afterwards of just how many masks I'd been presenting to the world. Oh, will you like me if I'm like this? Well, what if I'm like this? Maybe you like me better if I'm like this. And having that feeling of something that was beyond all of that. That was actually, I would call an initiating moment of my life where I got to experience what I was searching for. And so it was like I had a North Star after that. I was like, okay, that's what I'm heading towards.
Yeah. And it sounds like it wasn't, it just kind of goes back to other things we've talked about. It sounds like it wasn't a thought. It was an embodied sensory experience, right?
Yes.
This could be another one of those things that I'm just making up, but us yoga teachers do that from time to time. I've always felt like, if I can kind of say it like a meal and a recipe, right? What comes first? Ultimately, the food probably came first. The food came first, and someone reverse engineered that and then created a recipe like, oh, okay, I was blah, 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 blah. No, okay. When we're learning to cook, we might use a recipe, but a recipe is created to help other people experience something that's already been experienced, right? I don't think a chef doesn't come down and be like, all right, let's just make up a bunch of stuff. Like they experience that in the kitchen and they're like, how do I recreate that? That's kind of how I think about philosophy. And again, like I have a philosophy degree, but I feel like I even feel like yoga philosophy is like, it's like the recipe. It's not like the experience. I think for some people, it gives a little feeling like if you cook a lot and you read a recipe, you can kind of taste what it's going to taste like. You know what I mean? You get like a sense of like, all right, I get this. So it's a recipe isn't nothing, and a recipe is usually very helpful. But I think in terms of the yoga tradition, long before it's been bifurcated into this modality and that modality, my guess is that the experience of yoga is that it's a sensory experience. And then the philosophy and the technique is more of like, I've reverse engineered this. Here's a written map of what it was like and how to get there. And so I always feel like, because I feel like a lot of times yoga philosophy gets kind of like buoyed up, like it's pious. And then the movement of the physical, it's just, this is physical, but the philosophy is really pious. And I usually I don't quite buy that. I really feel like the philosophy is probably a written or an intellectualized record of an experience felt. And I would guess that the majority of the listeners, whether you're an Ashtanga, a Yin practitioner, Bikram, whatever it is, or like, my guess is that the reason that the deep down reason that you practice yoga is because it helps you feel a way, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe the mind's a little bit more clear, and the movement of the mind is a little bit quieter. But I don't think most people have an intellectual first engagement with this practice. I think it's largely sensory.
I totally agree. I feel that too. Yeah, absolutely. And, I think even if you do study, the Vedas, and you look at the different drishis or the seers of certain texts or the seers of certain mantras, it's clear that they are, at least my interpretation, is that they are speaking from their own direct experience, and they're trying to communicate much what you said earlier of, trying to communicate what the state of yoga is. I have to go through my own personal experience, and you brought it down to presence. And, and I feel like much the same thing, these teachings did come from those who had accessed these exalted states and were seeking to try to communicate just that, a map for us to follow. And of course, we can all be enamored by the end state as a goal, that's where we're going. And I think that is one thing that certainly tripped me up for many years, and I think trips many up, is that anything that's goal-oriented, in that way at least, that I will be, I'm seeking this state of enlightenment. The light bulb's going to go on and I'm going to be happy forever. It's just, I think that's a trap for so many of us, because then we don't get to be in the isness of just what's arising in the moment, because we are not in that santosha or just even acceptance of what is, because we feel like we should be somewhere else. And if we're not somewhere else, then we're not showing up, or there's something wrong with us. So maybe you could speak to that for a moment.
I almost feel like, okay, I'm going to give the simplest example. Pigeon pose. Like, two things can be true at once. I can be doing pigeon pose because I want an outcome, right? Like I can be doing pigeon pose because I want more flexible hips. I'm doing this now because I have a goal. And also I can be doing pigeon pose at the same time to address the discomfort that exists. I can be doing pigeon pose now to use the sensation to focus my mind. I can be doing pigeon pose right now because I want to appreciate, like, I have a body, I have a hip, I want to take care of it. So I think this just must be one of these things in life where multiple things are true. It's normal and probably healthy in most situations to have a goal, and also goals can be a little futurizing. So we just kind of have to I think we have to let those experiences just live simultaneously.
Gosh, I love that. Absolutely. Yep. I have that. I'm seeking that openness in my hips, and I'm going to do this pose, and I'm going to sit through the discomfort because I know that's why I'm doing it, for sure. Yep. And I'm going to breathe through it and be in, and one has to be in the experience ultimately. Well, yes, you can check out and just hope that the pose is going to do itself because it's uncomfortable, or you can choose to stay in the presence of the discomfort and see what strength or insight arises just being willing to be with the discomfort. I think for me, just because that came up through what you just said, came to me anyway, for me, that's been a huge part of my whole yoga journey, learning how to sit with discomfort, whether it's in pigeon pose or whether it's in some of the extraordinarily hard kriyas in Kundalini yoga.
Totally.
Where you have
it's really hard. It's really hard.
It is. Where you have to overcome yourself.
For sure.
And in doing so, you definitely become more resilient and stronger. And so that's like, I guess the inner journey within the yoga practice is that willingness to be with what is arising without judging it and making space for it and still holding the desire and the reason that you're there.
Yes.
Yeah. Wow. So we have just about 5 minutes or so here. There's so many things I'd love to talk with you about.
Flip a coin.
But I'm curious, about what's lighting you up as a teacher right now, in the context of, where the general populace is at and where you're at, and, how you're seeking to engage with where people are at, if that question even makes sense.
Yeah. I think there's a couple things, right? Like, I think one of the things that has been really exciting to me, or a growth in a learning curve, is this is kind of a catch-all word, but changing the way I practice and changing the way I teach just a little bit. It's not like a massive shift, to be a little bit more, and here's the catch-all, a little bit more functional. And literally what I mean by this, and here's like literally the phrase that I've been telling my students forever. Not forever, for about a year or two. We want the stuff that does the stuff to actually do the stuff, right? And so for what I mean by that is, like, we think about, like, well, what do we do in yoga with the hamstrings a lot? Well, most of what we do with the hamstrings is stretch them, but is stretching the hamstrings' primary function? No, it is a function of the hamstrings, but it's not its primary function. Its primary function is to bend the knee and to extend the hip. So if I want to approach my hamstrings a little bit more functionally, do I want to have 90% of my focus to be on one of the things they do, and then 10% to be on everything else? And the answer is no. Like, to me, because a lot of times in yoga, we kind of sometimes think we own the market on balance, like being balanced. But functional to me is actually like a much more just understanding a balanced approach to how to use a body. So now I start to say to myself, okay, well, what are the hamstrings function? They're X, Y, and Z. Okay, then let me just practice and have an equal distribution of those things. So this practice, I'm just going to I'm going to do whatever I'm going to do. But I'm going to extend my hip and I'm going to flex my knee as much as I stretch that hamstring. And when I do stretch that hamstring, it ain't going to be passive because I'm not training my hamstrings to lay down. I'm training my hamstrings to be able to function in a lengthened position. So that really emphasizing that world with which, to be honest, it's a little bit more of a marriage. I don't do heavy weights. I never have. But before I did yoga, I played hockey for 15 years in Detroit. So I understand strength and conditioning. I've done some amount of strength and conditioning my whole life, and I love strength and conditioning. And high-level strength and conditioning coaches can be really interesting and smart. So for me, posturally and technically, it's really making, and again, it's small revisions, but it's kind of thinking more about the ratios of what I'm doing with my stuff. Another example is back bends, right? Even just thinking about spinal muscles. So the majority of back bends that we do in yoga don't actually use the spinal extensors to extend the spine. The majority of back bends that we do in yoga use the arms and the legs or gravity to pull the spine into flexion. They don't even use the spinal muscle, to pull the spine into extension. They don't even use the spinal extensors. And so I'm okay, I don't want things to be done to the spine. I want to do the things with the spine to the spine. So figuring out, even in conventional poses, conventional back bends, because to me, this isn't getting rid of all the old stuff. It's continuing to update the technique. It's updating the software. So it's more okay, well, how do I do bridge pose in such a way where, I'm going to use my arms and legs to extend the spine, but how do I make sure I'm actually using the spinal extensors to extend the spine? Because if I'm not using the spinal extensors when my spine is extending, I literally have to step back and be well, what am I doing? How is this going to help? This is going to feel good. It's going to be nice. It's going to help me do a pose. And kind of it's kind of so oftentimes when people say take yoga off the mat, the immediate implication is the ethics, the philosophy, the mindset, 100%, totally. But I actually want to, I don't want to do Upavishta Konasana for 10 minutes so that I'm good at Upavishta Konasana for 10 minutes. I want to do Upavishta Konasana for 10 minutes so that my legs actually work, right? And so the technique that I'm going to apply, I have to consider how my legs actually function, and I want my practice to support that. So that I think is a big thing. I think the other two things, I've trained Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 7 years. I train 3 or 4 days a week. And being an older grappler, it's hard. I mean, it's hard young too, but for me, it's just maintaining good strength and mobility, right? So even though I do know yoga is not just about physicality, I really love the physicality of using my yoga practice to both offset and support the other things that I like to do in my life. And then the final thing, and I never thought I'd say this because I'm so long-winded. The final thing that I have a total love-hate relationship with is short-form content. And I don't mean 20-minute classes. I mean a 60-second reel that actually communicates something, that teaches something. Or short for my trainings, little sidebars, little 3-minute short bit pieces that just break one thing down, and challenging myself as a communicator to teach in the way people consume information now, which is shorter. And there's downsides to it, but guess what? It's what it is, And so I still crave teaching and communicating and sharing. So figuring out ways that I can communicate a bit of information and insight in a really short little bite, which is something I always pushed back at. But now I'm like, all right, let me take on that challenge and see if I can do it.
Wow. Well, you just really inspired me with everything that you just said. Thank you, Jason. Thank you. Yeah. And you are absolutely right about that investigation into functional muscular movement within the body and how it serves us in our lives. Because I agree, we don't want to do chaturanga just to be good at chaturanga. We want to do it because we want to, build greater muscular strength in general, or, capacity. So, gosh, thank you. I loved that. And it lit up so many areas of my own heart and brain as I was listening. And I also love your approach to challenging yourself. And it's funny because that's been up for me as well, just in the last couple of days. It's like, I think I was feeling almost like I'm just cruising in my life and my teaching. And then boom, suddenly it's like something came off and I woke up and I was like, oh, wait, I got to really challenge myself and shift and move and grow and expand. And so I love hearing you say that. Thank you for the reflection of it and the clarity that you carry.
My pleasure. And I want to say something real quick as we wrap up. Because this is coming to mind, and it refers to something you said, and it's brief. So I started teaching yoga before I did any training, like so many people of a certain generation did. But then I did a training, and it was a 2-year training that started in 2000 and ended in 2002. And the 4 primary teachers were Rodney Yee, Richard Rosen, Patricia Sullivan, and Mary Piffard. And I knew, even though I was a novice, I knew they practiced. And that might sound obvious, right? It might sound obvious. But not only did I know they practiced, but I knew that they innovated. I knew that they changed. I knew they continued to grow. And so I think, because you brought this up in a slightly different way earlier, it's just really important that we keep investigating, that we stay curious, and that we don't. One thing I've gotten a lot better at over the years is not backing myself into a corner about anything. Like, just kind of knowing, like, hey, this is what I prefer. This is why I prefer it. I might change my mind at some point, but this is kind of the lane I'm in. Here's why. Here's how I'm thinking about this. I just feel like as teachers and as people opening ourselves to this, because no matter what happens, if you keep practicing yoga and you stay alive and you keep teaching yoga, you're going to change. You're going to change. You're going to evolve. I say this all the time. Like, can you imagine doing the same job for 25 years and not changing software or learning, like making one, I'm not saying change jobs. I'm saying like not do one thing different. So we can't as teachers, we can't back ourselves into a corner. We have to be willing to continue to practice and grow. That's it.
God, I love that. Absolutely. Absolutely. There was a moment when everything changed for me. And that was when I realized that everything that I was teaching ultimately was coming from my own direct experience. And that's where the true power was. Having said that, I do think it's so great to have conversations like this that at least light me up and tune me in, like, oh yeah, there's a fun thing to explore, add another nuance, or just keep studying, so that there is a sharpness and there is that innovation. I too just love the freedom, and thankfully I've always been blessed with teachers who supported my evolutionary nature and my desire to approach the practice in that way. And so I appreciate you sharing that in yourself as well. Yes, I feel like if we're going to meet these times and where people are at, we have to innovate and find ways.
For sure.
Yeah.
We do.
Yeah. Wow, Jason, thank you so much for agreeing to speak with me here today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Kia. It's great talking to you. I'm glad that you're doing this. Who, if you can tell me, who else are you going to talk to?
Well, the other two, well, obviously Annie Carpenter, because Annie was my teacher for many years. And
I didn't know that. Annie's great.
What a generous human being she is. She taught me, she took me all the way through the YogaWorks teacher training ranks very quickly until I was co-teaching with her. And
got it.
So yes, I owe a lot to her wisdom and the way she mentors. Powerful.
Sure.
And then also Elena, who I've known for a long time. And I also love her approach, evolutionary approach. She's always learning something new and digesting and then bringing it in and finding, new nuances and things. So I'm excited to speak to her as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah. So yeah, you were the three, and Yvonne Kingsley.
I was going to say, you know what? When we were talking, I kept thinking to myself, I know someone. I mean, I'm sure we have plenty of students in mind, but I know there's someone that I could think of that is like an overt shared student, and it's of Yvonne.
Yes, and she's spoken to me so much and inspired me to check you out and to explore what you're doing.
I love Yvonne. Yeah.
Wonderful. I love that. Okay. Well, I guess thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you to our entire team behind the scenes at Glow. I'm so grateful for your care and commitment to serving our members around the world. Thank you to our teachers for so beautifully sharing your gifts and talents. I'm also grateful to our lovely community of Glow members. You've supported us since 2008, and because of you, we get to continue to do the work we love. It's the combined support of our team, our teachers, and our community that grants me the privilege to continue to bring you the Glow podcast. Thank you to Lee Schneider at Red Cub Agency for production support, and the beautiful music you're hearing now is by Carrie Rodriguez and her husband Luke Jacobs. And remember, take care of yourself because our world needs you. Thank you for coming on this journey with me. You can find the Glow podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or glo.com/podcast, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. I'm Derek Mills.